Disgust is the emotional trigger that sparks real change, and it's often the most underrated force in personal transformation. Most people think change begins with inspiration, motivation, or even knowledge. They believe that if they can just read the right book, watch the right video, or hear the right advice, their life will shift. But that's not how it works in reality. Change doesn't truly begin until you've reached a point where you can no longer stand where you are. It's that deep emotional discomfort, that raw feeling in your gut that says, "This is not who I am anymore." You can't fake it and you can't schedule it. It's not a polite realization. It's a breaking point. Disgust is different from frustration because frustration still tolerates things. It complains, but it endures. Disgust doesn't endure. Disgust slams the door, burns the bridge, and refuses to go back. It's when your current reality becomes so unbearable that the fear of change becomes smaller than the pain of staying the same. Think about the way people often delay making changes. They'll know they should quit a bad habit, improve their health, or take control of their finances. They'll tell themselves they'll do it soon, or when the time is right. But the time never seems right because they're still comfortable enough to avoid action. Comfort is a quiet trap. It doesn't push you forward, and it doesn't make you desperate enough to escape. But disgust is different. Disgust is when you've stared long enough at your own results and said, "I am done with this." It might happen in a single moment. Seeing a bank statement that shows you're broke again, noticing the look of disappointment in someone's eyes, hearing your own excuses out loud and realizing how empty they sound. That instant can snap you awake. Suddenly, the mental fog clears and you see the cost of your choices with painful clarity. When disgust arrives, it bypasses the part of you that negotiates. Normally, you might debate with yourself. Maybe I can wait until next month. Maybe I'll try later. But when you're truly disgusted, that internal conversation is over. There's no committee meeting in your head anymore. There's only action. It's like a switch flips, and the energy you used to spend avoiding the problem is now redirected into solving it. Disgust doesn't whisper, it shouts. It makes you restless, unable to sit still. It makes you want to clean up, cut off, and change direction immediately. It's almost physical. You feel it in your chest, in your stomach, in your posture. You stand differently. You speak differently. People can sense it. They don't hear you trying anymore. They hear you declaring. The reason disgust is so powerful is that it has no patience for halfway measures. When you're disgusted, you don't dabble. You don't try something for a week to see if it works. You commit fully because you're no longer seeking comfort. You're seeking escape from the old reality. That's why change driven by disgust often sticks longer than change driven by inspiration. Inspiration is like a spark, it feels good, but it fades unless you keep feeding it. Disgust, on the other hand, is like a fire that consumes everything you no longer want to live with. It removes options. It burns the plan B, bridges. You stop keeping your bad habits on stand by just in case, and instead shut the door permanently. You can see this in the stories of people who have transformed their lives radically. The person who was deep in debt and finally shredded all their credit cards after one humiliating call from a collector. The individual who looked in the mirror, saw the toll unhealthy living had taken, and cleared out their pantry in one afternoon. The employee who walked out of a job that drained their soul and decided they would never again trade their life for a paycheck that made them miserable. These aren't casual changes. They're born from disgust. They didn't happen because someone politely suggested it was time to improve. They happened because that person reached a threshold where enduring the current situation was more painful than the fear of change. Disgust works because it forces you to confront reality without sugarcoating. It strips away the stories you tell yourself to justify why you haven't moved. When you're disgusted, you no longer compare yourself to people doing worse just to feel better. You stop saying, "At least I'm not as bad as," and start saying, "This is not acceptable for me, period." That's the mental shift that separates people who talk about change from those who actually create it. When disgust is real, you stop negotiating with your limitations and start eliminating them. Another reason disgust is such a potent trigger is that it aligns both your mind and emotions. Many people know logically that they should change, but their emotions haven't caught up. Logic says you should save more money, but the emotions say it's not urgent yet. Logic says you should take better care of your health, but emotions say you can get away with it for now. But disgust unites them. Logic and emotion suddenly agree, this ends today. That's when momentum becomes unstoppable, because you're not pushing yourself with willpower alone. Your entire being is pushing in the same direction. It's important to understand that disgust isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet but deep. It can be a slow, building realization that culminates in a final, undeniable decision. Maybe it's waking up every day with low energy until one morning you realize you've been living in a half-life for years. Maybe it's watching someone else succeed while you know you've been capable all along but lazy in your efforts. That quiet kind of disgust can be just as powerful, because it seeps into your thoughts day after day until you can't ignore it anymore. The truth is, until you get disgusted, change is optional. You can take it or leave it. You can tell yourself stories, but when disgust sets in, change becomes non-negotiable. You can't stand still because standing still now feels worse than moving. It becomes easier to take uncomfortable action than to stay in your current state. That's the reversal point. That's the trigger that moves you from someday to now. Tolerating a problem guarantees its survival, and that's one of the hardest truths for people to accept because it puts the responsibility squarely on their own choices. Most people like to believe problems persist because of bad luck, difficult circumstances, or the actions of others. They'll say, if only this situation would change, I could move forward. Or if other people didn't keep creating these issues, I'd be fine. But the uncomfortable reality is that as long as you are willing to live with a problem, it will live with you. It's like an unwanted guest who keeps showing up because you never firmly ask them to leave. If you don't draw a clear line, the problem assumes it has permission to stay. Problems are opportunistic. They survive on your acceptance, your excuses, and your willingness to adjust your life around them rather than confronting them directly. People often underestimate how adaptable they can be in the wrong way. Humans are incredibly skilled at getting used to things, even when those things are harmful. A bad job becomes not that bad if you tell yourself the paycheck is steady. An unhealthy relationship becomes not worth leaving if you convince yourself it's better than being alone. Debt becomes manageable if you make the minimum payments each month and stop looking too closely at the interest. In all these cases, the problem doesn't get better. It just gets absorbed into your normal life. The more you adapt to it, the less urgent it feels to address, and the longer it stays. It's not that you don't know the problem exists. It's that you've decided, consciously or unconsciously, that you can live with it. Tolerating a problem also has a way of reshaping your identity. If you live with a certain limitation long enough, you start to see it as part of who you are. The person who has always struggled with money begins to say, I'm just not good with finances. The person who has been out of shape for years says, I'm just not a fitness person. By adopting the problem into your self-image, you give it a permanent place in your life. You stop looking at it as something you can solve and start seeing it as something you simply have to work around. This is one of the most dangerous traps because it doesn't just keep the problem alive. It locks it in place. There's another reason tolerating problems guarantees their survival: the comfort of routine. Even problems can become familiar, and familiarity can feel safer than the uncertainty of change. You might dislike your current situation, but you know how to navigate it. You know the frustrations you'll face and how to cope with them. Change, on the other hand, means stepping into the unknown. You don't know if it will be harder, riskier, or more uncomfortable than what you have now. So, people stay put, tolerating problems because the discomfort they know feels easier to handle than the discomfort they don't know. This is why some people remain in the same job for decades despite hating it, or stay in relationships that drain them emotionally. It's not because they enjoy the problem, but because they've built their lives around it. Tolerating a problem also teaches others how to treat you. If you allow a coworker to constantly dump extra work on you without pushing back, they'll keep doing it. If you allow a partner to speak to you disrespectfully without consequence, they'll keep doing it. The same principle applies to life itself. If you accept poor results without taking action to change them, life will keep giving you those results. Problems are like weeds. They don't need permission to grow, but they thrive when you don't remove them. Ignore them, and they'll spread. Address them decisively, and they stop growing. One of the subtle ways people tolerate problems is by minimizing them. They tell themselves, it's not that bad, or at least it's better than before. This mindset is deceptive because it gives you just enough comfort to avoid taking action. By lowering your expectations, you shrink your vision of what's possible. You stop asking, how can I make this better? And start asking, how can I live with this as it is? That's a shift from problem solving to problem enduring. Over time, this mindset drains ambition and energy because you're always working around the problem instead of removing it. It's also important to realize that tolerating a problem isn't a neutral act. It's an investment in keeping it alive. Every day you live with it. You're feeding it with your time, attention, and emotional energy. That energy could be going toward building solutions, pursuing opportunities, or improving your situation, but instead, it's being spent maintaining the status quo. And the longer a problem stays, the more it entrenches itself. Habits form around it, relationships adapt to it, and systems are built to accommodate it. At a certain point, removing the problem requires more effort than it would have if you had addressed it early. This is why small problems ignored for years often turn into major crises. Another dimension to tolerating problems is that it changes your threshold for what you're willing to accept in other areas of life. If you tolerate low standards in one area, you're more likely to tolerate them in another. It's like a slow erosion of your expectations. If you let a small leak in your roof go unfixed, you might also ignore the peeling paint, the squeaky door, or the broken faucet. If you allow one form of disrespect from someone, you might tolerate more serious forms later. Tolerating problems teaches you to live below your potential, and the danger is that over time, you stop noticing how far below you've fallen. The mindset that breaks this cycle is realizing that every problem you tolerate is a problem you've chosen to keep. You may not have created it, but by allowing it to remain, you've taken ownership of it. This realization can be uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of helplessness. It forces you to acknowledge that your life is, in many ways, the sum of the problems you've either solved or chosen to live with. While that's a heavy truth, it's also a liberating one because it means you can change your reality by changing what you tolerate. There's a point at which tolerating a problem becomes more exhausting than fixing it, but many people don't reach that point until the consequences are severe. The relationship ends abruptly. The health crisis forces lifestyle changes. The financial collapse wipes out years of work. Waiting for the breaking point means you'll deal with the problem when it's at its worst, which is always harder. The sooner you decide not to tolerate something, the easier it is to remove it. But as long as you keep giving it space in your life, it will remain, grow, and shape your reality in ways you might not even recognize until it's too late. A never again moment rewires your commitment instantly because it's not just a decision, it's a deep emotional contract you make with yourself. It's the point where you stop entertaining the idea of returning to the old way and remove every escape route back to your former patterns. Before this moment, you might flirt with the idea of change. You might try a new habit for a while, or you might talk about your intentions, but nothing truly sticks because you've left the door open to retreat. You tell yourself you'll see how it goes, and if it gets too hard, you can always quit. But when you hit a never again moment, that safety net disappears. You don't give yourself the luxury of going back because you've decided the old reality is no longer an option. The clarity is sharp, the decision is final, and it instantly changes the way you approach every action from that point forward. This kind of moment doesn't usually come from mild dissatisfaction. It comes from a point of no return. It might be triggered by a single humiliating experience, a sobering realization, or a confrontation with the cost of your choices. Maybe you see a photo of yourself and realize how far you've let your health slide. Maybe you check your bank account and see numbers that shock you into awareness. Maybe you wake up one morning and feel the full weight of years wasted on the wrong path. Whatever the trigger, it's powerful enough to shake you out of the fog you've been living in. You stop rationalizing, stop negotiating, and stop promising yourself you'll start next week. You draw a line in the sand and decide there is no more room for compromise. The reason a never again moment is so transformative is that it changes your relationship with discipline. Before this moment, discipline feels like a burden. You have to push yourself, remind yourself, and fight with yourself to follow through. After this moment, discipline feels like the natural consequence of your decision. You're no longer dragging yourself toward a goal. You're running from a past you refuse to revisit. The emotional weight of the old situation fuels your consistency in the new one. You stop needing constant motivation because the memory of what you're leaving behind is enough to keep you moving. The gap between intention and action shrinks because you don't waste time debating whether to act you've already decided. There's also a shift in identity that happens with a never again moment. You no longer see yourself as someone who's trying to change. You see yourself as someone who has changed. You stop acting like a visitor in your new habits and start acting like a resident. If your never again moment was about quitting a destructive habit, you stop calling yourself a person who's quitting and start calling yourself a person who doesn't do that anymore. If it was about improving your health, you stop thinking of yourself as someone trying to get fit and start thinking of yourself as a healthy person who trains, eats well, and makes choices aligned with that identity. This mental shift is subtle but crucial. It reinforces your actions and makes them sustainable. A never again moment also clears away the gray areas in decision making. Before, you might have struggled with temptation, convincing yourself that one small slip wouldn't matter. But after this moment, the boundaries are non-negotiable. You've decided that the old behavior, habit, or standard is completely off limits. There's no bargaining, no just this once, no partial return. This level of clarity is rare, but it's what allows people to make sudden, dramatic changes that last. You don't keep unhealthy food in the house for guests. You don't take on extra debt just this one time. You don't answer the call from the person who used to drag you down. The decision has already been made, so you simply follow it. What's remarkable about these moments is how quickly they can rewire your energy. Someone who's been stuck for years can suddenly act with urgency, focus, and determination after hitting that breaking point. Procrastination disappears because there's no longer a question of whether you'll do it. It's already done in your mind. You might have spent months or years gathering information, weighing options, and overthinking. But when the never again moment hits, all of that mental noise drops away. Action feels automatic. You don't feel like you're forcing yourself. You feel like you're finally doing what should have been done all along. These moments are also powerful because they remove the illusion of multiple paths. Before, you might have believed there were several ways things could go. After, there's only one. You've committed so fully that failure isn't even framed as an option in your mind. If setbacks happen, You don't take them as signs to give up. You treat them as obstacles to work around because you're not going back. The old life is closed off. This kind of mental finality can be more powerful than any external accountability because it's not about someone else holding you to a standard. It's about you holding yourself to a standard you refuse to violate. Another critical element is that a never again moment often redefines what's acceptable to you. You raise your standards in a way that makes the old version of your life intolerable. You stop tolerating certain behaviors, both from yourself and from others. You stop accepting excuses that once felt reasonable. You stop engaging in situations that once felt familiar, but were actually destructive. This redefinition of acceptable standards creates a kind of natural filter in your life. You start attracting people, opportunities, and experiences that align with the new standard, and you naturally repel those that don't. The interesting thing is that you can often trace life-changing transformations back to one of these moments. Someone who completely changed their finances can usually tell you the exact day they decided they would never be broke again. Someone who turned their health around can often remember the exact situation that made them say, "This ends now." Someone who changed careers entirely can often point to the meeting, the comment, or the realization that made them walk away. These moments are like internal earthquakes. Once they happen, the landscape is permanently altered. Even if you tried to go back, you wouldn't fit into the old life anymore. What makes a never again moment so potent is that it taps into both emotion and logic simultaneously. You feel the emotional pain or frustration so deeply that you can't stand it, and you also see the logical path forward so clearly that there's no confusion about what to do. This dual alignment creates instant clarity, and with clarity comes speed. You stop wasting time gathering courage because the courage has already been generated by the decision itself. All that's left is to act, and you do it without hesitation. Disgust without disciplined action leads back to old patterns, because emotion alone, no matter how intense, cannot sustain change over time. You can feel a surge of frustration, shame, or determination in a single moment, but if you don't turn that surge into a structured plan and consistent behavior, it will fade, and you'll find yourself slipping back into the same routines you swore you'd leave behind. Emotion is the spark that ignites movement, but discipline is the engine that keeps it running. Without discipline, disgust becomes just another memory, a dramatic moment you remember talking about, but one that didn't actually change anything in the long run. The truth is, people often confuse feeling ready to change with being prepared to change. Feeling ready is an emotional state. Being prepared requires systems, habits, and commitments that hold you steady when your initial motivation fades. When someone reaches a breaking point and feels disgusted with their situation, there's a sense of urgency to take immediate action. This can be powerful, but it can also be dangerous if it isn't channeled into something consistent. In that moment, they may clean out their fridge, sign up for a class, start a budget, or block a toxic person's number. Those first steps matter, but they're not the whole journey. Without follow-up, the emotion that drove those decisions will weaken, and the pull of the old patterns will strengthen. Habits are like grooves in the brain. They've been carved over time through repetition, and it takes more than a single burst of energy to replace them. Without discipline, the mind naturally slides back into those grooves, no matter how much you wanted to change in that heated moment. Discipline acts as a bridge between your emotional decision and your long-term results. It's the structure you build to make sure your daily actions align with your new standard, even on the days you don't feel like it. It's waking up early to train when the excitement of starting a new fitness routine has worn off. It's tracking your spending every week instead of just vowing to be better with money. It's continuing to work on your business after the thrill of the idea has been replaced by the grind of execution. Without that bridge, You're left standing on the side of good intentions, looking at the other side where results live, wondering why you can't seem to get there. There's also the reality that disgust, as powerful as it is an emotional high point, and emotional highs are temporary. They can feel all-consuming in the moment, but no emotion sustains itself at full strength forever. When it fades, you need something else to carry you forward, and that something is discipline. Discipline doesn't rely on how you feel, it relies on what you've decided. It's the difference between working out because you're motivated and working out because it's simply part of who you are now. It's the difference between saving money because you're excited about a goal and saving money because it's just what you do, no matter what. Discipline makes the behavior non-negotiable. The pull of old patterns is not just about habit, it's also about identity. If you've been a certain way for years, your brain is comfortable with that version of you. It will subtly try to return you to it, even if you've decided you don't want to live that way anymore. Without discipline, those subtle pulls become strong currents. You start making small exceptions, telling yourself, just this once. You skip one workout, then two, then a week. You make one unplanned purchase, then another, until your budget is gone. Before you know it, you've drifted back into the exact life you were disgusted with in the first place. Discipline is the anchor that keeps you from drifting, the steady force that keeps you from being pulled back by the undertow of your old self. Another problem with relying on disgust alone is that it's reactive. It's a response to pain or frustration, which means you have to wait for things to get bad enough to feel it again. That's not a sustainable way to live. You don't want to keep cycling through crisis and reaction. You want to create steady progress without needing to hit rock bottom each time. Discipline allows you to act proactively, to keep improving even when things are going well. It shifts your motivation from, I have to get out of this mess, to, I want to see how far I can go. That's where real growth happens, and that's where lasting change takes root. It's also worth noting that discipline protects you during emotional lows. There will be days when you feel tired, discouraged, or tempted to give up. If your plan for change relies solely on emotional intensity, those days will derail you completely. But if you've built disciplined routines, you can keep moving even when your energy is low. Discipline doesn't require you to feel like doing something. It only requires you to do it. That's why the most successful transformations are built on consistent actions rather than occasional bursts of effort. One of the most effective ways to turn disgust into disciplined action is to create clear, measurable commitments. Vague promises like I'm going to get healthier or I'm going to be better with money don't give you anything to hold onto when the initial rush of motivation fades. Specific commitments like I will go to the gym 3 times a week, or I will save 10% of every paycheck. Create structure and accountability. They give you a concrete target to aim for, and they make it easier to notice when you're slipping. Without this kind of clarity, it's easy to rationalize small deviations until you've completely abandoned the change. Discipline also thrives on environment. If your surroundings are filled with triggers that remind you of your old patterns, it's much harder to maintain new ones. Part of disciplined action is shaping your environment so that it supports your decisions. This might mean removing unhealthy food from your house, setting up automatic savings transfers, avoiding places or people that tempt you to slip, or organizing your workspace to make productivity easier. Without these environmental reinforcements, you're constantly fighting an uphill battle against temptation and convenience, which increases the odds of falling back into old habits. Another key aspect of discipline is tracking progress. When you rely only on emotion, you might not notice when you're making small improvements, which can lead to discouragement and eventually quitting. Tracking your actions and results, whether it's in a journal, an app, or a spreadsheet, gives you tangible proof that you're moving forward. This proof can keep you going on days when you don't feel like you're making much progress. It also allows you to adjust your approach when something isn't working, rather than giving up entirely. The combination of disgust and discipline creates a powerful formula for change. Disgust provides the urgency to start, but discipline ensures you keep going long after the urgency fades. Without discipline, the emotional energy that once felt unstoppable becomes a memory, and you find yourself telling stories about that time I was so determined, without having much to show for it. With discipline, the story is different. You can look back and see that the disgust was just the beginning, the spark that lit the fire, but it was the disciplined action that kept it burning until it transformed your life into something new. When you change, your environment and opportunities shift too, because the world tends to respond to who you are being, not just what you are doing. The way you carry yourself, the standards you set, the habits you practice, all of these send signals to the people and situations around you. If you've been living with low standards, surrounded by people who expect little of themselves and others, you naturally attract circumstances that match that energy. But when you start to raise your expectations for yourself, when your actions begin to align with a higher standard, the old environment no longer fits as comfortably. Some people will drift away, some opportunities will disappear, and new ones will begin to emerge. It's not magic, it's alignment. Your choices start to act like a filter, allowing in what matches your new direction and screening out what doesn't. This is why real change often feels lonely at first. When you shift your behavior, it disrupts the balance of the relationships and environments you've been part of. Friends who are used to you being a certain way may not understand why you've changed. Colleagues who are comfortable with the old you might resist the new you because it challenges their own sense of normal. The invitations you once accepted without hesitation might stop coming when people see you no longer align with those activities. It can be uncomfortable, but it's also necessary. You can't step into a new chapter of your life while keeping every page of the old one intact. Change creates friction because it forces everything around you to adjust or to move aside. Opportunities shift in a similar way. Many people believe opportunities are random, but in reality, they tend to show up for those who are prepared to handle them. If your habits and mindset reflect inconsistency, disorganization, or a lack of seriousness, certain doors won't open for you, not because they aren't there, but because you aren't in a position to walk through them. Once you change, once you become disciplined, focused, and intentional, opportunities that were invisible before start to appear. People notice your work ethic and reliability, and they think of you when something valuable comes up. Your reputation improves, your network evolves, and the flow of possibilities changes direction. Changing yourself also sharpens your ability to recognize which opportunities are worth pursuing. Before, you might have said yes to anything that came your way, even if it didn't serve your goals, because you didn't have a clear sense of direction. But as you grow, you become more selective. You start to see the difference between distractions and genuine opportunities. This selectiveness actually attracts more of the right things into your life, because you're no longer scattering your energy across everything that asks for it. You're focused, and focus has a way of drawing resources, people, and situations that match your aim. Another shift that happens when you change is internal confidence. You start to walk differently, speak differently, and present yourself differently, even if you're not consciously trying to. This shift is subtle but powerful. It changes how others perceive you and how they decide to interact with you. People are naturally drawn to those who carry themselves with purpose and self-respect. They trust them more, they offer them more, and they're willing to invest in them. Your environment responds to the cues you give it, and confidence is one of the strongest cues you can send. It's also important to understand that change doesn't just attract better things. It repels what no longer fits. The people, places, and habits that matched the old version of you may start to feel uncomfortable or even draining. You might find yourself losing interest in conversations you once enjoyed or feeling restless in places you used to feel at home. This isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that you've outgrown certain parts of your environment. As you move forward, the gap between your new self and your old surroundings becomes more obvious, and the tension between them becomes harder to ignore. Eventually, you have to make a choice. Either lower yourself back down to fit your old environment or continue growing and allow your surroundings to evolve with you. The shift in opportunities also has a compounding effect. The first changes you make might bring small improvements, an introduction to someone valuable, a minor career advancement, a chance to learn something new. But each improvement opens the door to another. A new skill leads to a new role, which leads to a bigger network, which leads to an even greater opportunity. This compounding growth is one of the most rewarding parts of personal change, because you begin to see how interconnected everything is. A single decision to improve yourself can ripple outward into dozens of new possibilities you couldn't have predicted when you started. There's also a psychological component to this shift. When you change your habits and mindset, you raise your own expectations for what's possible in your life. Before, you might have dismissed certain opportunities as too big or out of reach. But as you build competence and discipline, you start to believe you can handle more, and that belief makes you more willing to take risks. The willingness to step into bigger challenges is what often separates people who transform their lives from those who stay stuck. The opportunity might have been there all along, but now you have the courage and capability to seize it. In some cases, the changes in your environment and opportunities will feel almost immediate. You might meet someone new within days of starting a healthier routine. You might get a job offer soon after committing to personal growth. But in other cases, the shift takes time. Your environment is like a garden. It takes a while for the old weeds to be cleared out and the new seeds to grow. The important thing is to keep tending to the soil by continuing your own development. The stronger you become, the more naturally your surroundings begin to reflect that strength. There's a tendency for people to underestimate how much their environment influences their results. If you're surrounded by people who settle for less, who avoid responsibility, or who waste their time, it's difficult to maintain a high standard for yourself without eventually feeling the pull to lower it. But when you change yourself, you create a magnet for others who think and live at a higher level. Over time, your circle shifts, and with it, your sense of what's normal shifts too. What once felt like an ambitious goal becomes simply how things are done. Because you've surrounded yourself with people and situations that support it. The real magic happens when your internal change and your external environment are fully aligned. At that point, progress feels natural instead of forced. You're no longer battling against your surroundings. You're being carried forward by them. The opportunities that come to you feel right because they match who you've become. The people in your life encourage your growth instead of resisting it. The habits you practice are reinforced by the spaces you inhabit. It's a complete shift in the ecosystem of your life, and it all begins with the choice to change yourself first.